What's up, Saints Row fans? By now I'm sure that you've heard of the newest map expansion update to Saints Row, as well as the upcoming story expansion, A Song of Ice and Dust. In this video I'll be breaking down the patch notes and the new bug fixes that were implemented in the newest Saints Row update called the Dustfaire update. But be forewarned that this will be a longer video, so if there are specific sections that you want to see, feel free to head down to the timestamps below. And if you want to find out more in depth about the map and story expansion releases, I highly recommend that you go and check out my last video where I go over the new map and story expansion. As usual, I've linked that in the comments and the description below for you. I also took a bit of a deep dive into the map expansion New Vallejo in my most recent live stream as well, if you do want to hear my thoughts on that. Before we do dive into this large list of updates and fixes, I wanted to extend an invite for all of you to join me Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time, where I live stream games like Saints Row, Diablo, and more. During these streams, I'll usually talk about the latest game news as well, so feel free to join me and chat about what is happening in gaming today. So without further ado, let's dive into what was all fixed in the new Dustfaire update for Saints Row. So starting off here, the developers do mention that this is the final expansion for Saints Row, meaning that we might not actually see anything after this Dustfaire and the Song of Ice and Dust expansion. They go on to say that they've further improved on the stuff that we have been asking for, including challenge tracking, fixes for achievements and trophies, better layering and customization, and more fixes for combat and skills, plus some tweaks to accessibility modes. Lastly, they mention in their little blurb here that they have added the ability to save the game while using cheats. However, this is not really accurate because the community manager mentioned in their update in their Discord channel that this will actually not be active until these story missions are added to the game. If you're looking for a date on when that will be, that will not be happening until August 8th, so you don't have too long to wait. So getting into the first batch of the patch notes, and we get into the quality of life changes. So what they have added better support for clothing layers, and we can now layer necklaces, wrist items, and jackets that you couldn't before. This should open up a whole new possibility for those of you who like the customization system in this game. I know that I definitely do. They have adjusted the difficulty of late game encounters for the boss difficulty and similar custom settings, adjusting the difficulty on harder modes to scale them more appropriately. Me personally, I am someone who likes to feel like a badass, so the harder modes thing isn't really going to affect me. But for those of you who do want to play on a harder mode, that is a good change for you. They've added new vehicles, emotes, and clothing items from A Song of Ice and Dust DLC. Now, when I was playing, I didn't really notice specific items from A Song of Ice and Dust. However, I did notice that they do have a clothing store and some new items available in New Vallejo. Lastly, for the quality of life changes, they have added enhanced visuals when the player is wet. Moving on now to everybody's favorite, what are the combat fixes that they fixed and implemented in this update? So they eliminated a bug with fine aim not snapping to the target. The minigunner will no longer run around and be invulnerable after being knocked back by the pain and gain. They adjusted camera when firing rifles in fine aim. Melee NPCs will no longer just stand in place while in combat. They fixed notoriety being stuck on level 3 under certain conditions. The Molotov is now working correctly when thrown by the Panteros. Pedestrians will no longer leave their vehicles to flee combat. They've adjusted damage of NPC grenades being thrown. The faction's call-in ability now works properly when fighting multiple factions. I'm actually really excited to see this because I'm assuming that you could have like an all-out faction war. I would love to see what this would look like. Panteros bombers will no longer hold the Molotov and gun in the same hand after throwing the Molotov. NPCs on fire now properly run around like they are on fire. This is something that I actually noticed in the Doc Ketchum DLC, where when they would start on fire, they would just act like it's not affecting them at all and still just keep firing at you. It's like, what are you doing? All weapons should now properly show hit markers on hit. They have corrected AI for melee NPCs when attacking the player. They've made adjustments to the health and shield values of specific idle and police NPCs. And lastly, enemies are no longer invulnerable when animating their dodge and staggering. All in all, I think the combat fixes are pretty good, and it looks like they've fixed a lot of issues that were prevalent from the Doc Ketchum DLC, like expansion that was updated recently. If you haven't played the game in a while, they have made so many combat fixes to this game that it feels, you know, like a completely different game from when it was originally released. I know that that was one of the big issues that people kind of argued with and everything. Moving on to the general fixes that they've implemented in the update, and they've fixed a range of localization and text issues throughout the game. They've also made changes to help remove desync while playing in co-op. Now this is something that I know that they've been trying to mess with for a long time, and co-op has just been insanely unstable from what I've heard. I haven't really played, I haven't played this game in co-op at all. But from what I've heard, it has not been a stable or fun experience, which sucks because Saints Row 2 in co-op was awesome. So I would have hoped that the reboot in co-op would have been a great time as well. Next, they've fixed placement of HDR settings in the settings menu. The incompatible game version error message will no longer show up when attempting to join a co-op session. They've corrected many problems with the weather states. Idols will no longer spawn outside gameplay bounds during flashpoints. DocBox HQ collectibles now has correct lighting. They fixed an issue with player vaulting. Hostile NPCs will now properly remove players out of their vehicles. Items in shop should all now have their correct thumbnails. Players will no longer experience an infinite load after building Saints Tower and starting a mission. Players will no longer experience an infinite load after fast traveling to Sunshine Springs while in co-op. Pause menu should no longer break when used. They have moved the placement of the FSR settings in the menu. They made pedestrian NPC audio lines play for both players while in co-op. They've added references to near/far camera controls in controller layout. They fixed an issue with the host is currently busy window not clearing when trying to join a player in co-op. They fixed players having weird behavior when being launched from a car while in co-op. They fixed an issue where players lose functionality when being downed in missions or activities in certain conditions. They've eliminated clipping issues in emotes. They have corrected display of skins when starting a criminal venture. They've fixed materials on ammo boxes. Maps will no longer render past edges when completely zoomed out. Players will no longer load into a single player game as a previous co-op partner's avatar. I did not even know that that was an issue, but that is hilarious. Clear HUD button will work properly when opened in the camera. Backing out of the Chicken Dinner Cosmetic Pack DLC details screen will no longer send the player to a blank screen. They have adjusted cursor range when viewing the cell phone map zoomed out. They've fixed control stick dead zones, resetting to 15 when restoring defaults. Forced underwear will no longer default to off when using restore to defaults. Player will no longer lose functionality when pausing the game while at the Empire table. Loading a save multiple times in one session will no longer break animations. Players will no longer see a items not unlocked interface when loading a late game save in co-op. Players will no longer lose functionality when trying to fast travel and getting a mission invite at the same time. NPCs will no longer attack the players in Saints HQ. At first I was confused at why this would be such a big deal, but then I realized that you can't actually fire your weapons in Saints HQ, so yeah, that would suck. Street lamps will no longer illuminate after being destroyed. Map icons no longer disappear after 7 ventures are built. Fixed NPCs and vehicles sometimes not loading in after completing a venture or mission. QuickTime events are being set to on when using restoring to default. The Saints AI will now follow proper road lines upon district completion. The client now properly loads into the host's game when waiting to join while the host is in a mission. Players' health regeneration now works properly when out of combat. They've added clear co-op messaging throughout the game to help players understand when co-op is possible. Cycle your next on your map options now works properly and shows the correct destination on the map. The radio station button prompts now display correct buttons if the player has changed their keybinds. And lastly, in this big list of general fixes is tutorials will no longer appear when tutorial frequency is set to off. So wow, that was a huge list of fixes and their general fixes, and even me just trying out the new map expansion, I ran into like 5 or 6 bugs. So if you do want to see that again, go and check out that live stream that I've linked in the description below. But yeah, they have a lot of bugs, and they've fixed a lot of bugs up to this point in previous updates and patches. Still, it seems like when they fix one, like 2 more pop up. With this being the final expansion, I'm hoping that they continue to at least provide some sort of a service to keep rolling out these bug fixes and updates, but we will see how that goes. Moving on to achievements, and this is pretty small. Me personally, not being much of an achievement hunter myself, this isn't quite as important to me, but I know that there are a lot of people out there who want to see this. So, in terms of achievements that have been fixed, players can now properly complete Wing It on the PS4. The Untouchable achievement is now unlocking properly. A Young Empire is now unlocking properly, and Jack of All Trades is now unlocking properly. Like I said, I am not a huge achievement guy, or really going for those achievements in games, but for those of you who have been having issues with these achievements, it is good to know that those have been fixed up for you. Moving on to the fixes and challenges that were implemented in this update, and these are pretty big. So, the Terminal Velocity Challenge should now properly register for both players while in co-op. Sideswipe Progress should now be properly updated. The Desert Daredevil should now properly update for both players in co-op. The Chalupa Cabra Challenge Pack should now properly update for both players in co-op. The Bright Future Challenges should now be properly updated for both players in co-op. Challenges should now be progressing when killing enemies from a passenger seat of a VTOL or tank. Kills with the Smelterville Slugger should correctly count. The Wing It Challenge should properly register progress for both players in co-op. And I'm assuming that this again kind of goes back to that achievement as well, so it was kind of a 2-in-1 fix. They have adjusted requirements for the Sunday Challenge. The Crowbar Challenge now properly progresses. The Collective Challenge now properly updates while in co-op. And I know that the Collective Challenge was a really annoying one that people had been asking for, that was supposedly fixed in the Bright Future massive update that they rolled out earlier this year. But apparently this was just another issue that they had of it being in co-op. Masks bought now count towards the Store Challenge. Players should now be properly credited for the Destroy Enemy Vehicles with a Towed Object Challenge. And lastly, Carjack a Police Vigilance now properly restricts challenge to the Police Vigilance vehicle. And that just about does it for all the challenges that were fixed in this update. From what it sounds like, again, and what I mentioned before, is that they've had massive issues with co-op, and with a lot of these challenges saying that they've now properly updated for both players in co-op. Again, that just kind of reiterates that whole co-op issue, and maybe it's something that they should not have even had in the game to begin with, seeing as it has had so many issues for them up to this point. Anyways, for those of you who were having issues with the challenge system while alone or in co-op, it's good to know that these challenges have been fixed for you. If you are noticing any other issues, either in challenges or anything in the game, make sure that you go to the support link. I have put that in the description below as well, to just let them know about what you are experiencing. I'm sure that their support is blowing up and has been for a very long time now, but just to let you know, that is where you can go to let them know if you're having an issue with the game. Moving into the vehicle fixes and updates that they've made, vehicles can once again have tether equipped while in the garage. They fixed an issue with camera being low to the ground while customizing the carts. Players are no longer able to be ejected from vehicles while hitting destructible objects. The camera will no longer zoom into the player when entering an aerial vehicle. Ned's Chicken Skipper is now properly awarded to both players in co-op. The helicopter's cannon is no longer able to kill another helicopter pilot from any frontal angle. Towing cable is no longer available to be attached to the hover bike. I did not know that was a thing, but that is hilarious. Motorcycles will no longer vibrate when stationary. The player is properly ejected from a bike when colliding with something at high speed. Vehicle health bars are now properly showing up when vehicles are damaged by NPCs or players. The vehicle delivery now works when the player is not near a road. And the hover bike weapons will no longer display as equipped when the player switches seats. Moving into the weapon fixes that they've added in the Dusfaire update, and the player speed will no longer be slowed from being hit by the pain and gain by their co-op partner. The MDI 68 focus rifle's meter now fills properly after being charged. The rifle's ammo count will now show the correct amount while in fine aim. They fixed an issue where weapons would enter an improper state while switching weapons. They adjusted damage bars when weapons are fully upgraded. The Pantero sledgehammer no longer consumes flow with heavy attacks. Weapons that should force heavy deaths are now properly forcing heavy deaths. The hand cannon now has proper ammo in the magazine when equipped from the weapon shop while dual wield perk is active. The MDI 50 tac shotgun is no longer available as a skin for other shotguns. And the idle skin for the bat now tracks specialist kills properly. Weapons along with combat, again, was something that they had a lot of issues with in the beginning game, so it looks like they're still adding fixes to the game to fix these issues with their weapon and combat systems, but it is definitely a huge improvement from when they first started. For the next section, it'll just kind of be under a big bundle of just activities and criminal empire missions, and it looks like they have implemented a lot of fixes on these items. So first off, we have Wingsuit Saboteur and challenges. So the helicopter for Wingsuit Saboteur will no longer fly around and spin when the player resets into the helicopter. This is hilarious, and I could see people getting really pissed at this. If you do happen to have a clip of this somewhere, please put it up on YouTube. Link it in the comments below, because I really badly want to see what this looked like. I'm sure I'll do it. Next, players will properly be teleported back to the helicopter when not landing on buildings. I did not know that this was an issue, and every time that I would not hit the building, it would always put me back in the helicopter. So I'm wondering if this is platform specific or not. Next, players will no longer see each other in a ragdoll state in the helicopter after hitting the ground and resetting. Audio clips during the activity will only be played once. Next, players will no longer be stuck unable to jump out of the helicopter after being reset. And lastly, they fixed an issue where NPCs sometimes don't spawn. Moving into the Chupacabra criminal venture, and friendly NPCs will no longer stand in place when joining player in combat. And then enemy arrivals no longer stop outside of the mission area. Next, they talk about the KAKTS radio criminal venture, and they say that the GPS to the next venture goal now works properly when all instances of gameplay have been completed. For the Mayhem activity / criminal venture, the player now properly receives money for destroying structures or completing the activity. For the Planet Saints venture, the trucks will no longer have a chance to be driverless. I didn't even know that was a thing, but I could totally see that being annoying when you're trying to take out the truck and there's literally no driver to kill to take the truck out. For the Atcha side hustle, the rewards are now properly given to both players while in co-op, and they have corrected the combat area for certain Atchas to allow for better AI pathing. Next, for the Pony Express side hustle, they fixed the crash when players arrived at the final waypoint while at top speed. Moving into the police surveillance, and they made it so certain police vans cannot be invulnerable. Going into the dojo activities, and the objective now properly updates if the master is killed with the flaming punch. Also, the flaming punch is now usable after completing the first mission of dojo. Move into some of the murder circus fixes that they implemented in the update, and as you know, this was the newest update previous to the Dusfaire update, so it looks like they did make some changes to the previous expansion. Players will no longer experience a loss of functionality when aborting Murder Circus. Next, players will no longer experience an infinite load when entering the achievements menu while in the first cinematic. Players are not able to start Murder Circus through the missions app and in an unintended state. They have removed default aim reticle while in scoped weapons. Players will now start the activity with full ammo in their weapon magazine. The fine aim reticle will no longer override scoped weapons overlay. And then lastly, they've adjusted water levels so players don't improperly enter a swimming animation. So surprisingly, it doesn't sound like there were too many fixes that were implemented in Murder Circus, and for me, that has so far been their best addition in their expansion pass. Murder Circus, to me, is a huge opportunity for the Saints developers in the fact that they can essentially bring in characters from even the other games or other franchises even, and have them be playable in this Murder Circus arena without making them technically canon to the game. To me, Murder Circus is something that I would definitely like spend money on as an arcade game, but that's just me. You guys should try it out for yourself and let me know what you think. Moving into the mission fixes that they've implemented. For the first effing day mission, they fixed mission failing when skipping cinematic and co-op. The players will no longer be stuck in menu controls when exiting to the main menu while in co-op. Player outfits will no longer change when exiting the APC. For the making rent mission, the Panteros will no longer run away from the player when entering the junkyard fight, and players will no longer spawn under the map when in the wardrobe after the tutorial video plays. For the Peter Principle mission, the props in the final fight are now destructible again. For the Be Your Boss mission, they have removed several table props being seen in the final cutscene. For the Idle Threats mission, they have fixed an issue with the player experiencing an infinite load after skipping a cutscene in the mission. Also, auto-aim no longer snaps to the enemy helicopter. For the Forge mission, the NPCs will no longer enter a brief falling animation when shot. In the Take Me to Church mission, the players will no longer be stuck in an infinite load screen before the final cutscene. In the Great Train Robbery mission, martial enemies will no longer spawn outside of the mission area. For the non-compete clause, the Gatling Gunner will no longer be idle when approached by the co-op player first. In the Dust Moot mission, the invisible objects are no longer blocking players' path in the mission. In the Rod Warrior mission, players will no longer crash when using Nitro upon entering the Balrog. In the Idle Hands mission, notoriety will no longer affect idle NPC spawns. For the Stiff Competition mission, they've adjusted several shirts that were clipping through the player's neck during cutscenes during the mission. They also put the Mime's outfit back on the Mime. The My Games, My Rules mission, players will no longer experience an infinite load while skipping the intro cutscene. They've also corrected an issue with the game crashing while starting the mission, and players will no longer hit an infinite load when restarting from checkpoint while in co-op. For the Identity Theft mission, the bus in the mission now behaves properly. They've adjusted the behavior of Chris Hardy during the mission. In the Breaking Ground mission, the Use the Criminal Empire table objective will no longer remain active when exiting the Venture table after declining in the fast travel. Wow, so that is a lot of mission changes that they've made just to all the missions all around. So it looks like they have put in quite a lot of time putting the fixes into that. Moving on to the fixes that they've implemented with the skills, and players are no longer able to activate throwable skills while dodge rolling. They've corrected requirements to use skills shown on icons with what they cost. The RPG Explosion signature ability will no longer freeze the skills app on the phone. Now that is a strong ability, such a big explosion that it freezes your phone. They've made a couple of changes for the Death Blossom skill. So number one, the skill will no longer become stuck when using it while there is no ammo in the magazine, and SMGs are no longer kept by the player after the skill ends. The next fix that they made was to the Smoke Screen skill, and players will no longer be stuck when using a melee weapon after using Smoke Screen. The next skill that was fixed is the Pineapple Express skill, and it does proper splash damage when the game is on higher difficulties. So the final section of the patch notes here, and it is the quality of life fixes that they've implemented. Some more quality of life, QOL. PC settings should no longer be showing up on console builds. They've made a couple of changes for dirty cheats. One of them is that infinite ammo now stays active after completing missions, and the client now receives notifications when the host activates dirty cheats. As for accessibility, they have adjusted the Murder Circus tooltips to work with colorblind mode. They have adjusted descriptions while full caps setting is enabled. Players can no longer set keybinds to actions that do not have keybinds by default. Restoring defaults no longer changes colorblind mode to Deuteranopia. And lastly, highlight method changed to border when loading saves. Wow, so that was a huge list of fixes, and while this is only for the Dustfaire update, I am really curious to see if they plan to add any additional bug fixes when the Song of Ice and Dust arrives on August 8th. If you enjoyed the video, make sure that you smash that like and subscribe button, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you are notified when I drop my next video. Lastly, don't forget to join me Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time, when I go live playing some big games as well as talking about the latest in gaming news. Thank you all for watching, and until next time everybody, this is Sly Spy Gaming, signing out.